Hello, and welcome to the Broke PhD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. G. This episode is part two of a three-part segment showcasing the conversation I had with future Dr. Shelika. If you have not done so already, please go check out episode 14, which shares part one of the conversation I had with future Dr. Shelika. And also be sure to check out episode 16, which will showcase part three of the conversation. On this episode and in this part of our conversation, future Dr. Shelika shares about her career and dissertation research focus on refugee and immigrant mental health. Additionally, she provides an understanding of the difference between the terms refugee and immigrant, and she shares some of the personal connections that motivated her to strive towards working with and further supporting this population.
So yeah, and I know like other people who've done like some people that have done doctorate degrees in psychology. I don't know many, but
Mhm.
the ones that I do know, it's like pretty intensive. And most of them are professors. Like I think they have taken some postdocs, but most of them are
Mhm.
professors too. I don't mind being a professor part-time, but
Yeah.
apart from that, I was like, I feel like health psychology is a really big thing, kind of different from counseling psychology, but
Mhm.
with the clinical base of it, really talking about like the healthcare system
Mhm.
and how we can help people with their health because not every healthcare system's perfect,
Yeah.
right?
No.
Same with like immigrants, refugees, and just anybody accessing the healthcare system,
Mhm.
really looking at like what we can do for the longevity of our health. Of course, not just physical, but mental, psychological, all the different aspects that we
Mhm.
can help each other, help ourselves. And yeah, I think even the refugee immigrant population's kind of underrepresented. I mean,
Mhm.
they've done a lot of research, especially with Syrian refugees that I've
Mhm.
seen a couple years ago, the first wave come in. And I'm sure there's so many more projects out there in Canada and stuff that are doing different things with refugee and immigrants.
Mhm.
And lots of them come here for a better life, right?
Mhm.
So they work really hard. Like I saw my parents and other immigrant parents like and refugee families work really, really hard to get to the position that they are. And I think that's why my generation, I guess it's second generation, you could say, we probably sometimes work even harder. That's just
Mhm.
my mentality. Is like you see
Mhm.
your parents work really hard, then you work really hard
Mhm.
because they made it easier for you, so then you work double.
Yeah.
Right? You know, they came here like
Yeah.
shifting their whole life over here,
Mhm.
not knowing the language
Yeah.
and trying to make ends meet, but then raise your children in a completely different country with a completely different language, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's really different. And it's really common here in Canada. We have a lot of families that like Canada is like the home of people from different places around the world. So, yeah, I think it's one of the things that like, you know, it's underrepresented and we see a lot of like different like intergenerational trauma, different things like that
Mhm.
in different populations while I was working with them.
Mhm.
So I've always been intrigued by that.
Mhm.
And I've worked with youth, I've worked in domestic violence, and I've always had people from different like ethnic backgrounds and working with them was just it's so great to work with them, not even just learn about, you know, what they're going through, but learn about their culture and their religion and their customs and stuff. I remember once I was helping a client, it was a family dealing with some financial issues. And I put my hand out to shake my hand. This is before COVID. And he's like, I'm sorry, I don't shake women's hands, right? Just out of respect. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I should have known this,
Well,
right?
it's hard, but at least you
Yeah.
recognized it. I think that's important too, is that some
Yeah.
people, when they're working with certain populations, they're just like, oh, well, this is how I do it. So it's the only like,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
least you're like privy to like, oh, wait, like they might have cultural nuances that I'm not aware of. Oh, I should make sure in the future, from this experience that I start to have that awareness of those cultural nuances so that I don't, make that not mistake, but like don't do that again if I work with anybody from that culture. So,
Mhm. Yeah, that's why I just like in general, like I try to unless they shake their hand, like put their hand out,
oh,
then
yeah.
I will. But yeah, it depends. Like I
Mhm.
just obviously I was just doing it as like, yo, hey,
Yeah.
how are you? But you know, I totally understand. I was like, oh, I'm so
Mhm.
sorry. Like and he's like, no, 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 like that's totally okay. I understand. I just
Yeah.
I have my boundaries and it's my culture. I was like, no, 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 you don't have to explain. Like
Yeah.
you just say that that's my boundary and that's fine.
Yeah.
So he was kind of surprised when I said that because he was like, some people were saying like, oh, you don't shake hands here, you don't shake hands from where
And
you're
that's not
from.
cool.
Yeah,
Like,
and I was like, well, he's like, in my culture, we respect women to the point we just don't touch them in any aspect, like
yeah.
even a handshake, even though that's friendly here, we don't do that back in my
Yeah.
country. And I respect that. So yeah, and then like, everyone has, like you said, their different nuances. So like learning
Mm.
about that.
Mm.
Obviously I don't know everything about culture, but
Yeah.
the thing is, trying to be approaching things in a more neutral standpoint.
Mm.
And another thing is, because English is my dominant language and I do
Mm.
speak other languages, I speak English really fast sometimes. And I realized with immigrant and refugee families, I just had to scale it back a little bit because I was speaking very fast. And
Mm.
they were getting scared to tell me that, oh, Shalika, you speak really fast. I
Yeah.
remember one family was like, I know you described this paper, like it was a paper to fill out,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not understanding because you were speaking fast. And then I realized they're probably too scared to ask me if
Oh
I'm
no.
speaking fast. They're like, yeah, we were too scared. And I was like, oh, no, no, no. Just always tell me if I'm speaking fast or what does that mean? Or, like let me know because sometimes I'm always everywhere. I might speak very fast. So, yeah, that's another thing I realized is especially my focus groups. That's something
Mhm.
I do is I take my time and I have a group that has really low English. So sometimes I
Mhm.
will express the questions through pictures. And I do have like translators in the group too that
Yeah.
really are so helpful and so great. But for the most part, like I'm like better. So like I've just realized with certain, like, as being in this research or even just
Mm.
working with different populations, like, I've learned a lot in general, even though I'm from a culture as well.
Mhm.
And that gives me a lot of like lived experience too, but also realizing other things and other customs and
Mhm.
things like that. And, having conversations about like, when you're building trust with people, just having
Mhm.
conversations about their culture, because that's like a big part of
Mhm.
their life, right?
Yeah.
And I can tell some of these families have a hard time talking about their culture because maybe where they're from, they've been silenced. Like they can't
Mhm.
do certain things in their culture. So
Mhm.
I told them, like, no one's gonna do that here. No one's gonna tell you you can't do that. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Right? You can pray, you can do what you need to keep your culture alive as much as you want it to be, right?
Yeah.
Like, so
I love that.
yeah. Yeah,
Especially
no,
like
it's
you being in like a counselor and being in the world of psychology and being an outlet for the people that you work with to feel comfortable. So I think that's another like big thing is that individuals who are coming from various cultures may not feel comfortable talking to others, like you said, about their culture if they're not provided the opportunity and showed and demonstrated that it's okay. And while this shouldn't be the norm, unfortunately, the way of the world is right now, like I love that you are providing that space for those that you're working with so that they can feel more comfortable to open up and so that you can kind of get to the root quicker and that you can
yeah.
help support them in a more effective manner. So I love that so much. And then I want to ask, just so that the listeners are privy, can you please just explain, because we talked about this when we first met, the difference between refugee and immigrant? Because I don't know if
Yeah.
everybody knows that
Yeah,
and
sure.
or if it's common
So
knowledge. So yeah.
yeah, so a refugee is basically there's different types, right? Like here in
Mm.
Canada, we have like refugee claimant, we have government assisted refugee, which the government assists, which they have to apply through their refugee camp. So most refugees could be war in torn countries, they're fleeing some type of prosecution or some type of danger. Domestic violence could be a lot of different categories for that, right?
Mhm.
I'm not too well versed in that, but I know like the certain categories for the most part.
Mhm.
So refugees, usually they would get either the GAR program, which is government assisted refugee,
Mhm.
or they could apply as like the refugee claimant as well, which is a different kind of category as well. So usually they'd come here and they would get like education, they can feel like good here compared to where they were at,
Mhm.
where maybe there was a lot of trauma they experienced. And there's in many parts of the world like
Mhm.
that Canada has helped many refugees come in from different parts. Could be Ukraine, Syria, Iran. These are the
Mm-hmm.
ones recently that have been coming in that I've noticed. Yeah, or just anywhere. Like it doesn't matter, right? It just
Mm-hmm.
really depends on like what's happening
Mm-hmm.
and kind of what Canada's, I guess, forefront is and what they're able to do. And immigrants, it's they want to come here for a better
Mm-hmm.
life, but there's different ways to come here. So there's different statuses. So there's like temporary foreign worker, which is like the work permit.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you get a job and that job gives you a work permit
Mm-hmm.
and you work here like a certain amount of years. And then maybe you can apply for permanent residency, which means like you're living in Canada permanently. And then after that, you can apply for Canadian citizenship. So the only difference between permanent resident and Canadian citizen is a Canadian citizen can vote, but a permanent resident can't.
Ah, got
That's
you.
the only difference. Actually, it's yeah. But work permit only gives you like they have parameters of like working conditions, working hours. And then there's also people that come in with study permits because they're studying at certain universities through international fees.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of high school students that go to high school here. Their parents are under work permit. They're under the 18 age, like they're minors. So they'll
Mm-hmm.
be under their parents. But once they start university, if they still have that work permit, they can't get domestic fees, which is like the fee of permanent. If you're permanent resident or Canadian citizen, you
Mm-hmm.
get the Canadian fees for schools.
Gotcha.
But if you're not, then you have to pay the international fee.
Oh, okay.
So sometimes some students will go to school, they won't. It depends because let's say someone who's domestic fees it's like maybe 7,000 a year compared to like international it's like 35,000. It's a huge jump, right?
Yeah.
So there's different categories. There's also like there's work permit, there's study permit. Those are two commons. That's refugee as well. I know some people what they do is like they get married to a spouse back in a different country and then they have to do like family sponsorship, spouse sponsorship, stuff like
Gotcha.
that as well. So yeah, there's many different like immigration categories. And yeah, I'm sure they take a certain amount of time. Like when my parents came in the 80s, it was different compared to now, of course. And then you also have like the international student stream, which is different, where you're just coming here to study specifically as well. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that's kind of the difference. Immigrants want to come here because
Mm-hmm.
they want a better life, they want to study, they want to get a job, and they want to contribute. And I mean, refugees are running away from something that's causing them harm, but they want to go somewhere safe where they can have a life. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
some of them potentially could go back. It really depends. I've had families from certain countries where like they did go back.
Mm-hmm.
Some just stayed and eventually became permanent residents and they
Gotcha.
work and they do everything they can. So
Mm-hmm.
those are kind of the two. And I've met a lot of like I had a friend, she had to flee
Mm-hmm.
from a country and unfortunately it's because her job put her life on the line, her and her
Gotcha.
family. And she had like this position in legislation and stuff like that. So she had to get the refugee status, come over here. She told
Mm-hmm.
me she hated it for the first 5 years
Oh
because she
no.
didn't know any English. I didn't know
Oh.
any English. And her kids were born like in the other country too. But like she was like,
Gotcha.
oh, Shelika, I did not like Canada for first 5 years. I was like,
Oh.
really? I was like, oh, but you know what? Like after hearing her story and just the things she went through, like I
Mm-hmm.
totally understand. Like it's hard to trust people. It's really
Mm.
hard to trust people.
Yeah.
And with her trust has been broken so much. So coming here for a better life, like now what she's trying to do is trying to do like good things for the country that she's from, but also
Mm-hmm.
like she's still living here and she's liking it more here now as time goes
Mm-hmm.
by because she's like, I feel more confident in speaking English. And I think that's one of the biggest things is the language barrier. And also like
Mm-hmm.
if people are going to judge you the way you speak English, which there's
Mm-hmm.
no perfect English.
No, there
Like
isn't.
there isn't.
It's
Such a
wild.
and I always even tell people like when you're from a different country and you're here and you're young, like make sure you keep your second language, your third language.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to keep that. Like I'm born here and I can
Mm.
speak Hindi, I have no problem, but I have an accent. So,
Mm.
but people understand what I'm saying, so it
Yeah.
works,
And that's
right?
okay. Like again, there's no perfect way to speak English. Like, yeah.
Yeah, no, there isn't. There isn't. Like,
Especially me being here in the United States, it's a whole nother conversation that I'm like, really, people? So yeah.
I mean, vitamin and vitamin, same
Yeah,
thing.
like it's
Tomato,
you
tomato,
understand what
right?
people are
Like,
saying. Get over it. Like
I mean, it gets the point across, and that's the thing. It's just I get a lot of sorry, my English is so bad. Like, and I was like, no, because if I'm clarifying, I just want to make sure that, I'm understanding what you're saying and I'm helping you the
Mhm.
best that I can, right?
Yeah.
That's what I say is just that if I ask you questions like, "Oh, do you mean this?"
Mhm.
then it's different. And we also have Google Translate, so I've
Yes.
used that a couple times too. Might not always be the best with different languages, but it gets the point across for the most part. And me and the family sometimes we laugh because I'm like typing or saying something and it comes out wrong.
Oh,
It's
no.
random, but
But I love that
sometimes
you're doing that to connect because you're trying to use
yeah,
all the tools that are available so that they can feel comfortable and you can make sure to clearly understand what
yeah.
they are trying to tell you. And yeah, like you have to use tools at times that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that. So I love that. I also want to say thank you for explaining the difference between refugee and immigrant. I appreciate that so much. Connecting to that, can you talk a little bit more about the research that you're focused on? I
Mhm.
know it's kind of working towards servicing those populations and those communities and really tapping into the mental health side of things. Can you please explain on?
Yeah, like we know that immigrant and refugee mental health, it's very important.
Mhm,
And we know especially for refugees, they deal with a lot of trauma. And I'm sure immigrants do as well, like in
mhm,
many ways from where they're from too. And I think one of the biggest things that I want out of the pre-assessment that I want to do is like basically I have like four simple questions translated into many languages with clinicians or different workers who speak the language who can also talk to them about this. And it's kind of like the questions I have is based off of like, do you have food? How do you feel being here? Like very basic type questions to
mhm,
really see like, okay, do they need further resources or not? And they're very basic questions. I didn't want to kind of go like, what are your basic needs? What
mhm,
are like, because they're not going to understand what basic needs is. Like, you really have to go down. So, I came up with some of the questions through like a ELL teacher, an English language learner teacher who teaches
mhm,
English to people who are new to Canada. So, I kind of went to a teacher that was really well versed, has experience, and
mhm,
can help me develop these questions and that they're easily translated into the languages I need to translate it, right?
mhm,
And I wanted to make sure that it hits the points of like food, feeling,
mhm,
like how do you feel about the language here, different things like that, so that if there is any type of concerns, that maybe we can help them with different resources
mhm,
as well. We also know like when people are new here, the biggest thing is to give them that sense of belonging, especially with students and families. Like it's sense of belonging, and some of them it's obviously learning, they want to learn English too.
mhm,
So we always like want to refer them to groups and different things where they can learn English and build that belonging, right?
mhm,
As well. And then from there, kind of see, like, especially with the refugee populations, also doing like assessment on trauma, which what the clinicians do, anyways. And most of the clinicians I've been working with, they all have a second language.
mhm.
So they've been really great in helping me because I don't think they've really like gone through. I'm sure they've heard my type of project before, but I'm kind of doing it like I guess in a small scale. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to see because, this project was run in the UK and Australia to see how immigrants and refugees are doing in the country and also what type of mental health help they need. And according
Mhm,
to the pre-assessment tool, is going to show me exactly where these families and individuals land. So it's really interesting now that I'm collecting data and I'm in the initial phases. Definitely, I'm seeing a lot more trauma,
okay,
which of course PTSD type symptoms in refugee populations, but we're also
uh-huh,
seeing it in the immigrant population as well.
okay,
But the immigrant population is really more basic needs related.
yeah,
Refugees, it's more same thing, survival, but
yeah,
it's hard to kind of get through that survival when you're traumatized
mm,
and there's a lot of more like behaviors happening there as well. Just meeting a couple of the families, even in person, that I've
uh-huh,
met. And I had to go through a lot of privacy hoops. We have a lot of
yeah,
privacy hoops here. I'm sure there is everywhere. But I had to go through a lot of privacy hoops to get the information and all of that. So
got
in
you.
the end, we're taking a primary care approach, making sure that because health psychology is also including all the clinicians, settlement workers, doctors,
Mhm,
psychiatrists. I'm also working with about four psychiatrists spread out with the health authorities I'm working with. And then they also told me, like, I guess the agreement we have is whenever I'm done my research, it's like I give them my research so they can use it for
Gotcha.
their own purposes to
Yeah.
make their department better, which is what I want.
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh, I love
Right?
that.
Yeah, and I mean, these psychiatrists are very like expert. They've been
Hmm.
working with refugees for a very, very long time,
Hmm.
immigrants as well. And it's nice to see that they know that there's different trends. And then
Hmm.
different populations are always coming in, right?
Hmm.
So, and with my data collection, I've just noticed like so many different trends as well, that makes me think about like writing about intergenerational trauma
Uh,
amongst different cultures. And I think I'm going to do a chapter on that for sure.
yes. Oh, I love that. That
So, yeah,
definitely is like it needs to be emphasized because like
yeah,
I
for
don't think
sure.
it's starting to be talked about a little bit more, but I wish it was talked about like more at the forefront because it's something that tends to get swept under the rug a little bit, but like intergenerational
Yeah.
trauma because all of us even now like you and I sitting here now like the traumas that our parents felt and our grandparents felt and our great grandparents felt and X, Y, and Z like they impact us more than we recognize. So
Yeah,
I
exactly.
love that.
Yeah, and I think it's important because like, I don't know where my great grandparents went through or what they've
Yeah.
seen, but the country that my parents come from, there was like British rule and there was all
Hmm.
these other things and colonization, which many countries it's happened in as well, and
Hmm.
just different things that we've all experienced, right? So,
Hmm.
and with like different populations coming in, there's every population has different needs. And one of the biggest needs I see, it's obviously like making sure that obviously their basic needs like food, water, shelter, job. I think that's the main kind of questions I get is like, and
Hmm.
education for their
Yeah.
kids and how to navigate the education system and
Mm.
things like that, right? And lots of populations, they don't want to access help. They're
Mm.
scared to
Yeah.
access help. And I don't blame them because it's
Yeah.
hard to trust people, like I said,
Yeah.
but it's a process. Some people from different countries, you do one thing, you get that thing. But here
Hmm.
you have to fill out much paperwork to really get what you need, right? I mean, unfortunately, that's how our system works. But filling out paperwork, me doing it compared to somebody who is new here, who doesn't know the language, and
Hmm.
doesn't know what type of paperwork we need, it's different,
Yeah.
right? They need assistance, they need help. And I think that's where like we come in as, frontline workers, counselors,
Hmm.
however that might look like, right? And I feel like when immigrants and refugees do come in, there's a lot of programs that do help them. Like I know there's many programs that will attach them to somebody that speaks the same language, will come visit them, will take them grocery shopping and show them how to grocery shop and different
Hmm.
things like that. But I don't know if those programs are long term or not, or if it's
Gotcha.
short term,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And I'm sure there is some great programs out there too.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's also building a bank of resources here in
Hmm.
Western Canada where I can refer, these clients, because it's not
Yeah.
just about, oh, I take the research and I'm done. It's more of like,
Yeah.
also, what are these resources that we can refer these families?
Hmm.
Right. So, yeah. And then every program is different. They also have like, they're funded by the government. They say, oh, you might have to just be a permanent resident. You can only be a
Gotcha.
refugee. You can, like there's just certain standards for programs too as well, so
Mhm.
we have to think about that. But
Yeah.
I guess the most part is just to really show how much they're struggling as well and how much help they would need, and more like long-term help as well.
I love that. Obviously, you're doing your research, but you're putting it human first. I think that's important because oftentimes, as researchers and those in programs, you can be like, oh, well, I'm just, looking at these individuals to get their data and like that's it. But you're thinking holistically. You're like, okay, yeah,
Hmm.
getting information from them and collecting data in the sense of that I'm going to analyze that data, but I'm using the information that I'm gaining from these individuals to better understand them as a whole and better understand how I can truly help them with what they need and, make a larger impact on them in the sense that, as you highlighted, basic needs is first and foremost, that they can't really start to heal or go through the process of addressing trauma if their basic needs aren't met and they don't feel comfortable enough
Mhm.
living in the new country that they are now in. And so I think that's so cool that you were doing that.
No, it's really great. I know it's tough, but
Mhm.
I think there is a lot of great research here in Canada, and I've seen in America as well, a lot of great research that can coincide with the work that we're doing when people are coming in. And of course, I know there is a big negative connotation about like people coming in and taking
Mhm.
jobs and all this, type of
Yeah.
things. But my thing was always like if anything happened to where I live,
Mm.
I would have to go to a different country too,
Yeah.
right? Then I would be a refugee because if something ever, God forbid, happened here
Yeah.
and I would have to go to a different country and other people are like, well, why are you here? You're taking our jobs and da 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 da. And, I mean, I understand, but I also, there is room for everyone. I do believe
Mhm.
that. And I think what I've seen working with immigrant refugee populations that I have worked with and that I know is that
Mhm.
everyone's really hardworking and they do really want to make an impact where they live. They really do want to. Canada is a place where I can practice my religion, my
Mhm.
culture. I can work, I'll pay taxes. I do all
Mhm.
these things to make sure that I'm on my 2 feet. And
Mhm.
they're really humble about it. And obviously, there's two sides to everything. You could debate anything you want, right? But especially people who have to forcefully leave their country because it's just bad there. It's not livable. I wouldn't want anyone to go through that, right?
No.
But
Yeah.
unfortunately, people have seen or gone through really horrific things.
Mm.
And when they come here, safety, belonging, and basic needs is what it is, right? Like I used to work with a couple students before, and they were from a certain country. I remember like a couple people, I think, dropped their pens and then they
Mhm.
went underneath their desk because
Um,
they were so sensitive to the sound
mm.
because they said there was bombs dropping every day where they were from, right?
Mhm.
So it was really tough for them. And some of the students didn't understand. And, as a group, we took the moment to really talk about, like, these students really talked about what they were going through a little bit in their past countries. And I think it was a good learning moment for those students to realize because
Mhm.
some of the students were like, oh, I just thought you came here and this is this. But, yeah, no, it kind of brings a learning moment about
Mhm.
it as well. So yeah, I know like there's differing opinions and that's okay, like to have
Yeah.
differing opinions and everything like that. We all do in
Yeah.
different things in our life, but I also know like it's tough. Like I've seen my parents struggle, I've seen other people struggle. I think in Canada we're all like really lucky, but then we'll also Canada I think needs to do a lot of work when it comes to a lot of things,
Mhm.
healthcare, immigrant refugee stuff, mental health. I mean, the list can go
All
on.
of
I
it.
think it's any
I know.
healthcare list goes on. I can go on and on.
I definitely can agree on that too, as far as we're like all the systems just need to be overhauled. If you had it
Yeah.
my way, we'd burn all the systems down and start over, but I know that's unrealistic.
And
And
I
I know
mean, we
some
have
people
a
out there will be like,
universal.
"What? What is this thought?"
y-
But I agree that more can be done, and I give so much kudos for you for doing the work that you're doing. Well, that concludes this episode, but please be sure to go check out episode 16, which will share part 3 or the final part of the conversation I had with future Dr. Shelika. And just as I'm having a conversation and sharing the experience of future Dr. Shalika, I ask you all to go out there and find your own support systems and have conversations with your peers so that you can collectively navigate your programs rather than feeling like you're braving storms on your own. If you are interested in hearing more episodes and learning more about Broke PhD Podcast, then please check out the website brokephdpodcast.shop to continue to follow along. I'm also going to put a plug out there for my shop. So please, please, please go check out my shop with the website being brokephdpodcast.shop and to also share it with anyone and everyone you know. I am excited to share my art and to share my creativity with the world, and I hope it brings you all as much joy as it brought me in creating it. Wherever you are in your own journey, I'm wishing you all the best, and remember, you got this. Thank you again for listening, and I'm your host, Dr. G, and I hope you have a wonderful day.